Today we are with Estrella Maestro, a friend in Cyber Voluntarios. She will be talking about decentralizing digital spaces in Europe. So welcome back. Enjoy this Emperor Live 2024, the afternoon session. We're going to talk about digital spaces in Europe with Ana Higueras, Project Director in Ideas for Change, and Giovanni Maccani, Research Director in Ideas for Change, moderated by Esther. Thank you, Valeria, and welcome, everyone. So we'll be talking about next generation internet, Horizon Europe, and how they are helping contributing to decentralizing digital spaces and how to fund people who need that funding. To keep on boosting technology, we'll be talking about trust, how to help citizens trust the internet, how to fan, as Helikin and Melanie said, how to fan the startups. And collaborators are working to create a decentralized open code. And then we will open the can of worms again. We'll be talking about quantum computation. All of this now, this afternoon. But let's start with Anna and Giovanni. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. So, ideas for change and next generation internet. We've been talking about it for a lot, but please explain what NGI is and what ideas for change does. Well, so I have to talk about NGI that has been popping up in this room. Well, the good news is that I have Giovanni by my side. NGI, Next Generation Internet. For those of you who are not familiar with the acronym, is an initiative by the European Union that started in 2016 as a result of a series of legislations, Digital Compass, DGPA, data governance, etc. And this program wanted to create internet around people using Europe's values at core. So it's around four fundamental pillars. The first one is values. Internet needs to be decentralized, trustworthy, just, open, sustainable, and many more. And you will agree with me in most of the objectives. And then these values are being promoted through the use of funding because NGI is a distributor of funding, especially for the open source projects. All projects funded by NGI are open source. NGI is an institution of the European Union that distributes funds, that funds many projects. Thaler, NGI, little consortia that work around the same thing. They use this money and distribute it in different open sources. You can have the information if you want it. Basically, we cover the full internet spectrum, hardware, software, and network. So this is very complicated technology-wise because we're saying that NGI funds programs about data sovereignty, decentralization, blockchain, AI around people, interoperability standards, architecture, always within the open source ecosystem, but the variability is limitless. So that's why NGI is so interesting, but at the same time very complex. We like to say that NGI is a community of communities. This is what we find in our daily work. Both Giovanni and myself work in NGI Outreach Office, which is a coordination and support action, a mechanism activated by the European Union to activate and articulate the communication and the outreach done from NGI. But this is more or less it. If you have questions, you can raise your hands, and Jorge or someone else will give you a mic. What's your role? What's the role of ideas for change? Well, I've never spoken in Spanish about these topics. I'm not Spanish, but I will try. If you want to speak in English, I don't want to ruin the afternoons, the translators' afternoons. I will try in Spanish. So we are part of one of the projects in NGI. Our project is NGI .eu, which is at the service of all the projects and all the developers funded by these projects. Well, so far, more than 1,000 solutions got funding. So we work on participation and dissemination. Within this project, we have a very specific role. Ideas for Change is an SME located in Barcelona. We are a for-profit, and we been researching on grassroots citizenship and citizen-generated data. Now we're working on governance on decentralized data, data trust, data governance, and well, we wanted to lead the working project for diversity and inclusion in this program. So this means that the first day we had this task on the table, and it is very difficult because there are many perspectives and different angles, and we defined our purpose around 5 pillars: resources and tools that are made accessible, compliant with the guidelines. Then we focused on the innovators and the developers and how to get more diversity, both in terms of solutions and team and talent. The third pillar is the community. It has to be an inclusive experience. Well, everybody's opinions are taken into account. And then Anna will be talking about the attempt to involve more women. And then the effort to try and incorporate all of this in the European Union's agenda. So far, the NGI projects have covered several topics. Some are very specific, for example, data sovereign identity. Some others are more general, privacy, safety, security, NGI 0. But they always come from the European Union's agenda. We try to do the opposite. We try and include the citizens' visions or the community's vision to try and extend the European Union's agenda to include those topics identified by the communities. Yolanda, in her introduction, said,
World. Hasta ahora diría que NGI tiene better.
And so far I would say that NGI has better technology, but it's not bridging the gap with the rest of the world. So Anna, would you like to talk about how you are trying to involve more stakeholders or the underrepresented stakeholders, such as women. Yes, part of the task was to do an analysis, and so once we have analyzed the underrepresented
Muy específico que nos encargaron era
communities, we zoomed into the women ecosystem in innovators and NGI, and then involve those women and other underrepresented communities. So we tried to use the existing data, the 1,000 teams of innovators that received funding in many NGIs. We wanted to analyze the existing data to try and understand the gender distribution. We didn't find data in all the teams because, for example, a team applying for an open call, we don't know how many women and how many men do they have. There are many white men, and you don't have this data available, even if it is a compulsory information that should be explained in the application. But well, we got data about 200 teams out of 1,000, and we saw, to nobody's surprise, that approximately 14% of the innovators were women, and out of the 14%, only 7 were women in leading roles or in predominant roles in what was being delivered. So we've been working on 2 different lines. One, we try to interview all the women that are within the ecosystem to try and understand what barriers they've encountered so far and what could improve their situation or the work of the ecosystem. And then we do an analysis of the women and the non-normative genders in the digital ecosystem. So by way of an illustration, I would say that if you look at the numbers of women who contribute to the Linux kernel, it's only 2.4%. Women who contribute to other spheres are less than 5%. So 14% seems like a very low number, but it can be even worse. So we are interviewing women. We have started to work on grassroots studies. We work with communities of female developers and tech STEMs, and we create safe places to understand the situation, what can be done about it, and then report all this data to the European Commission and the Outreach Office. Perfect. So aside from women, with the data you have identified, you have also identified other underrepresented communities. What are you doing about it? Well, yes. One of our missions was to identify who is underrepresented in the NGI environment and to try and involve those minority groups, those cohorts. So we thought about what kind of minorities would be represented there. And we realized that there weren't that many because the open source community is composed of people who don't share their data. It wasn't easy at all to determine who's working on NGI in all diversity variables that we were looking for. So the next question was, well, then who's missing? It was very interesting to hear in the previous presentation that the user is missing. Because of course we have a community of open source developers. It's okay, so the next question is, who are they? Who are the end users of those services? Because not all the solutions, not all the projects have identified a specific end user who might not be the society at large or the individuals. When we talk to the NGI developers, we realized that the end user for them is the public sector. Their codes can be expected to become integrated in public services. So we try to look at the level of involvement of the public user, public public sector end users, and it was almost zero. So we decided to do something that I find quite interesting. First of all, we tried to figure out why they were not there and to try and involve them, getting them involved. So we found out that we cannot expect the public sector will go to GitHub and take this code and use it. As we heard this morning, this is not an easy task because the public sector does not have the staff or the capabilities or the resources to do that. There are some companies such as Citizens Lab and some others in Europe such as Resource Public, etc., that help the public administration to try and use those codes for themselves. For example, through companies such as Citizens Hub or in an open way. So we try to get everyone's involved. 1 minute, Giovanni. I'm sorry. I'm taking too much time. So very briefly, we do workshops with the blind, for example, to try and understand what their needs are. And we also have consortium things. I'm sorry.
Tiempo de contaros.
We won't have the time to tell you everything. So we have here 3 QRs for you to take a look at the things we've prepared for you. For example, you can get access to the NJ community platform where you will find all the opportunities. You will also have the opportunity to interact with other groups of innovators. Then you have the NGI newsletter.
Todo lo que son las open calls.
And then the open calls that are now open, all the fans that are available. So please scan these QR codes if you want to know more. This is great for those of you who are here and those who are following us and streaming. Do you have questions, Yolanda?
I will try to start with one of them. One of my main questions, well, what you're doing is fascinating. Over 1,000 projects, everything that you're doing, what you're trying to achieve in Europe. I think it's very ambitious, but I would like to know in your perspective, what's the opinion of public institutions? Are they aware of that citizen digital sovereignty? Because my question is, are they aware of all the possibilities that technology would open to have that, to have all those opportunities? Are they aware, or is there still a lot to be done? Well, my opinion, it depends on where. There are different countries, different cities, and there are different cultures. I've lived in different places in Europe, and maybe Barcelona is way more open, is way more advanced to these technologies than other places. But based on our research, we are pretty scared about the process of public procurement of technology that is happening in cities like Madrid and even in Barcelona. The town council, the region, buys anything, any proprietary tools, and then you don't know what's going to happen. We don't know whether the contracts are 5 years, and maybe after those 5 years, the company takes all the data because the contract was not adequate. And this is a pretty large problem. How can this be solved? Well, it's pretty tricky, but I think many of the things that have been said today, for example, literacy, awareness, all those things are very important. And in your view, as advisors, what would you tell a public institution to convince them of this need? Oof, that's complicated because we're talking about a very high technological complexity level, and it's far from the testing level. One of our discoveries is that the end user of NGI solutions is often someone else. It's a different NGI problem solver. So often the public sector doesn't take this into consideration. Our job, in a way, is to bridge this gap because we have this unrepresented party. We are talking to public institutions that are not so present to tell them what's being done. But from there to the public sector to adopt the solutions, well, I think there's a long way. I want to add something. We're testing, and we're trying to test a different model for NGI. The public sector has a problem that can be solved through an algorithm or a specific technology, and the call is based in the real problem that the solvers are going to work on, rather than developing a component that's going to end up in an environment that is totally like very far. We ran a pilot project, a very small project, I think 4 years ago. We were part of a very small consortium that was testing, it was at the time of Ledger and at the time of those NGI projects, and we were testing something that we called a virtual fill gap. And that's what it was about. We had people from the from the public sector, sometimes from the philanthropic sector, working with developers. We learned a lot, and we learned a lot about the public mechanism to be able to adapt our technology. Sometimes we didn't make it in time, but we learned many interesting things that we're not going to have time to elaborate on, but it made us think that this could be a very interesting model for NGI. Do we have time for one more question? Oh, it's too bad. We don't have time. Okay, we could do it some other time. Okay. A round of applause for them.